Now, minimum wage is still embarrassingly low for a country that is supposedly as wealthy as ours. But what we know right now is that the wealth is concentrated to the top 1%. Now, the last raise, it turns out, for the minimum wage was back in 2009. Now, I actually remember that because that's back when I was working at a grocery store, stocking in the back. Now, I had hired in at somewhere around $5 an hour. Wow. Now, that was actually the previous federal minimum wage. And of course, I saw my wage finally go up to $7.25. Wow. And at the time, I was like, hey, maybe I can actually afford to pay my car insurance and eat this month. Awesome. So that's how bad our minimum wage has traditionally been. So again, we have not had a raise since then. And turns out, adjusted for inflation, the wage in 1968 would actually be equal to $11 an hour. So not only are we behind, but we're embarrassingly behind where we were back in 1968. So that is a disaster. Now, that's, of course, because we don't index the wage for inflation, so it has ended up losing a lot of its value. So, in plain terms, people are still working as hard, if not harder, for actually less money. Now, that's actually far less than even others in other wealthy countries. Now, among the world's wealthiest nations, the U.S. has the lowest national minimum wage relative to the median wage. Now, of any of the wealthy nations represented in the OECD. Now, let me give you some examples here. France, right? Now, the national minimum wage, close to about 1,500 euros a month, is equal to about 61% of the median national wage. In Australia, it's about 54%. In Canada, it's 46%. In the United States, the federal minimum wage works out to just 35% of the national median wage, which is the lowest in the OECD. So, congratulations, America. We're actually doing worse than everybody else. So, when we compare ourselves, for example, to other nations, well, it turns out our workers get paid less. We have less benefits, and there are less safety nets when something inevitably happens. For example, we get sick and we don't have health insurance to take care of it, and we get massively ill. Well, you can't take time off. You got to work. There's no paid time off. There's very little sick time, and that is, of course, unpaid. And, of course, a lot of people, especially working for minimum wage, don't have access to health insurance. So they can't afford that health insurance. That's why we need, of course, a lot of changes to our system. But it just shows you how backwards we are compared to these other nations. Again, you look at these countries in Europe, OECD countries, wealthier nations, and they usually have some form of universal health care, truly universal health care, that is normally single payer or heavily government subsidized, not for profit. For example, in, I believe, Switzerland runs a not-for-profit healthcare system based on private insurance. But since it's not for profit, they don't have for-profit industries. Insurance companies basically using you and your illness or lack of illness as a cash cow. We're the only country that does that. And of course, that's why we pay twice more for health insurance, health coverage, than we do in the UK, for example. So we've got all these policies that are actually very anti-worker here in the United States, and it's reflected, and minimum wages is part of that, but it's reflected in the rankings that we have with the OECD countries. So now, France, I love the example of France, right? Because they have one of the highest, 61% of median national wage, right? That's because in France, if you threaten to lower their wages or you threaten to take away their benefits, they are literally out in the street protesting. They will shut that shit down. In America, we wouldn't even dare dream of doing it. We do not have strong unions, and we don't take to the streets to protect our benefits, our wages and our benefits. We let corporations walk all over us because we've been told to shut up and know our place. Case in point, there's an argument against the minimum wage, right? And it's been peddled a lot by conservative sources, conservative sites, and people who are basically paid industry shills, right? From the restaurant associations that are like, well, if we raise the minimum wage to, for example, a living wage, then you're going to have to pay for a $12 hamburger. No, first off, nobody's going to buy a $12 hamburger. That's ridiculous. They would actually, a lot of people would decide, okay, I'm just not going to eat out anymore. They would either be forced to lower their prices or do something else to try to figure things out. Now, these companies would have to be more competitive on their prices, right? They do, if they actually want business. Meanwhile, why they will send some of that cost onto you. They'll pass it on to you. There's only so much they can realistically pass on to you before people actually stop buying from them. And with the corporation sitting on plenty of money, they will end up absorbing some of that cost, or most of that cost. So basically what that means is not $12 hamburgers, but maybe an extra quarter or 50 cents. Now, if I have to pay an extra quarter or 50 cents for a hamburger to make sure that people that I buy the sandwich from that are working there can afford to actually live, well, I'm actually fine with that. And I suspect that there's a lot of people who will be fine with that. That actually saves me money as a taxpayer when you think about it, because those people working at McDonald's or wherever, they're not going to have to get on food stamps later on. And so, secondly, part of that argument is, okay, well, look, since now labor costs so much, well, these companies, they're going to pull back in their labor. There's going to be less employment. They're actually going to give people less hours. Well, turns out that's not entirely the truth. A massive 2014 review of over 200 minimum wage studies concluded that moderate increases in the minimum wage are both a useful means of raising wages in the lower part of the wage distribution, and that it has little to no effect on employment and hours. So think about that, all right? So again, their main argument, $12 hamburgers, not feasible, not realistic, as they still have to have competitive prices and reductions in employment and hours, which again has been shown not to be true. Now, I believe that we should go for a living wage of $15 an hour. Now, there are studies that say, well, hold on, we don't know the impacts of what raising the wage so drastically will actually do. But there are places that we can look at, and one of them is Washington in the SeaTac area. Now, they raised their minimum wage to a living wage, and in so doing, they have seen a boon in the hotel industry. Now, that actually employs a lot of people working at minimum wage. Now, there's more investment, and a lot of the people the Huffington Post actually talked to said, and these are CEOs, right, of these hotel chains. They're like, yeah, I mean, it was a little bit of a consideration, but it wasn't our main consideration. Our main consideration is, what's business going to be like? Are there going to be customers? Is this a place where people are going to want to stay and spend their money? It's not so much wages, it's how much business they're actually going to make. And that's actually one of the biggest factors. It's not wages, it's not even taxes that are the main considerations of a company. It's, are they going to have enough business to overcome those and actually make a profit? In the case of SeaTac, they actually are seeing that. They are seeing business. They are doing investment in that area despite these high wages. So, now, there are also competing studies, to be fair, that have not undergone peer review that are opposite. One says, oh, things are getting worse. There's actually been a small reduction of employment. And there's another study that says the opposite. Now, we'll see which one is actually correct when they actually do peer review. But nonetheless, regardless on how fast you bring those wages up, wages definitely have to go up. There's no reason that in an incredibly wealthy nation that we still have people working for starvation wages for $7.25. You can't live on that. I mean, the people that are working and making $7.25 an hour, they can afford to take care of themselves working at a job. Now, I believe that you should be able to. It doesn't matter what job it is. whether it's taking out the, being a garbage man or flipping burgers. A job is a job, and it should make you at least enough to survive on without needing to turn to the government for assistance. Because being on government assistance kind of defeats the entire purpose of working at a job, and actually is a handout to the company. Because they know, well, that government assistance is there for people who are in poverty, and we're not required to pay a living wage, so we're just going to make all this money off the backs of the taxpayer, and we're going to give that money straight to the top. It is privatizing the gains and socializing the losses. That's what we've been doing, and that's what the minimum wage fight should be about. Or at least partly should be about. The other part should be making sure that people who work for a living actually can be able to live. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.